Today, we are talking about the effect of religious trauma on sexuality. For that, we have in the studio Dr. Danielle Kramer. Dr. Danielle is a certified sex therapist and a clinical sexologist. Very interesting. Dr. Danielle, please introduce yourself and tell us more about your upbringing.
So my name is Dr. Kramer. I was raised in Omaha, Nebraska, so the dead center of the United States, the Midwest. I've since moved out of Nebraska. It's just way too cold for me. There's snow and all of that there, so it's not my thing. But now I live and practice in Florida and Nebraska. So I'm a sex therapist and board certified clinical sexologist. So that means I do part-time clinical work and part-time research. So in my clinical work, I specialize working with people that have religious trauma, purity culture recovery. I specialize in AFAB, assigned female at birth, sexual health concerns, things like low libido, vaginismus. I also work a lot with LGBTQ plus care here in Florida. And then on the research side, I do a lot of work with LGBTQ rights. Lately, my research and my work has been really, really heavily taken over by abortion care and access. So that used to be maybe a third of my clinical research. And now after 2022 and the overturn of Roe, that's kind of like very much expanded that part. So now I travel about 7 to 10 days a month doing consult work for abortion care and access across the US.
Very interesting. I know you mentioned to us that you were raised in a religious home. I'm not sure, right? In purity culture. Is that something that
I was that?
Yeah, is that something that guided your career, like the career path you chose?
Definitely. So I went to Christian school my entire life. So from like kindergarten onward, had grown up in a Christian school. Didn't adhere to the theology, but was still like heavily raised in that culture. And so the teachings around sex and sexuality in purity culture, as y'all know, because we've kind of discussed some of your backgrounds as well, it's very restrictive, very prescriptive. Like, you must do this, you must do that. This is what makes a good relationship. This is what makes a good woman. And there's boxes, and you must fit inside those boxes, and anything outside of those boxes is deviant, right? So you're really given this extremely narrow description of sex and sexuality. And then when you kind of go out into the real world, so to speak, right? And it's not that you never existed in the real world. It's just that this was your culture and this was your education, and everybody around you believes this and reinforces this. And so then at some point, people generally step away from that, like really heavily inculcated culture, whether that's they go to college or if they go to like a very heavy-handed Christian college, maybe not till after college. But there's this moment where you start to interact with the rest of the world. And then you're like, wait, not everybody believes this crap and not everybody adheres. And there's this whole world of sex and sexuality out there. And so I didn't come out as queer until I was much older because I didn't even have the language to do it, right? And so this stuff really heavily impacts you. And as I came out of my own purity culture recovery, I was at that time in grad school becoming a therapist. And you really start to realize this stuff leaches into multiple areas of people's lives. And it really affects their sexual functioning and their ability to exist in a healthy relationship.
Yeah, that's it. Leeches is exactly the right word because it affects so much stuff that you don't even realize. Like all of a sudden one day you're like, wait, I'm doing this. Why am I doing this? Like, yeah. And then you realize, oh my gosh, this is like really deep seated stuff that a lot of times, even if people are not raised in religion or believing it, like you said, like, were you saying that you never really were that religious, but still the purity culture? Okay. Yeah. So it's like, all right, cognitively, I might know that this isn't supposed to be the case, but I'm still living as if it is.
Yeah. Right? I mean, some of us, like, I know Char's the same as I was growing up, but you grow up in this bubble. You don't just go to the church. You know, I went to the church. I went to school at the church. I was at that church like 5 days a week. And and then you leave. But the only people you ever see are in the church. And if you see them outside the church, it's all part of the bubble. You never talk to anybody or associate with anybody outside the safe church bubble.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is something that, like you were saying, I grew up somewhat religious, but my family was not restrictive in any way. And I still had that same issue because society around me, like everything was the same. You couldn't escape it.
It's very much, even in our own society, like you were saying, it is religious, right? And this kind of stuff is most people heavily think of like Christian, Judeo-Christian religions, or Abrahamic religions, they'll say, as being the root of purity culture. But let's not forget that this is also the culture that American society was built on top of, right? And a lot of European societies are also built on this kind of like puritanical, male equals this, female equals this, and this sexual script. I talk a lot in therapy about sexual scripts. Purity culture is a script that you're handed, and you're operating on this script immediately, right? Like you're thrown into it. You're in the society or you're in the church society, either way, and you're absorbing it. And so I always tell, just like you were saying, Char, like sometimes you're like, this is that purity culture thing. Oh my gosh, it's coming forward here again. And it's like asking a fish, what is water? A fish doesn't know what water is. It's been swimming in water its entire life. It doesn't know anything different. So when you ask the fish, what is water? It's like, what are you talking about? What is it? Like, it's not until you take the fish outside of the water, show it this stuff, right? You're like, this is what water is. And it's like, oh, I've been swimming in this and I didn't even notice it.
Yeah. For me, a huge realization was like, once I did get far enough removed from purity culture, which I stayed in it pretty much into like my early to mid 30s, and gradually kind of separating from it throughout my 20s, but then like didn't really separate until my mid 30s. And I remember it being like it messes with your psyche, because you like growing up in the purity culture, you hear all these promises of like, you follow these rules and you're going to have these results. You don't follow these rules and your relationships are going to be shit, and your sexual relationships are going to be shit, and da 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 da. And then given enough time, you see that's absolute bullshit. Like you've got people that didn't follow any of the rules that have great marriages and amazing families, and you have people that followed all the rules that have nothing but problems. And it's like, okay, this stuff isn't adding up here.
That's one of the myths and lies that we talk about. Like purity culture has tons of myths that it hands you, and you believe them because you don't know any different, right? We're talking about handing these myths to children who don't know any different, right? And one of those myths is, if this, then this. If you're a good girl and you wait until marriage, you give that special something to that special someone, then you're going to have a beautiful marriage. You're guaranteed to have a beautiful relationship and a beautiful sex life. And that's all you have to do. You just have to follow the rules. And then you're guaranteed this stuff. And then people do the right thing, right? Often a lot of the trauma that comes from purity culture is, I did the thing. Yeah. I did the right thing. But this isn't happening. My marriage is a mess. My relationship is a mess. My sex life, I'm not having good sex. I don't like the sex I'm having. Sex is painful. Often with purity culture recovery, we have things like vulvodynia, vaginismus, erectile dysfunctions, right? Yeah. That's another myth, is the light switch myth. Well, as soon as you get married, flip that light switch. Yeah. And all that other stuff goes out the window. And you're going to be fine. You're going to have great sex.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. It's literally just going to click on, and you're going to be you're going to have this amazing sex life that you always dreamed of. And yeah, I had vaginismus for 15 years. Like even being in a loving, supportive relationship and marriage, like you have all these deep-seated beliefs that my body was not agreeing with what I knew in my mind was true.
And did you ever have anyone tell you that it was normal? Painful sex was normal for a woman. Painful sex is normal. I hear that all the time from providers and therapists.
Yeah. And I was in and out of doctor's offices, like, okay, like asking them, like, will you check my hormone levels? Like I knew something wasn't right, but never put my finger on it until I found out about vaginismus. I was like, oh, and then later on, of course, I find out about religious trauma and the whole purity culture, it's like, oh my gosh, like all these things started falling into place.
Yeah. And how about
that's often how
from there moving to non-monogamy? It's a whole new thing. I can't even imagine how it was like for you, from like moving from that to having a healthy sexual relationship with one person in monogamy, and then all of a sudden like non-monogamy. Like,
yep, it's quite the journey.
Yes.
And non-monogamy isn't even given to you as an option, right? Like when you grow up in purity culture, just like being queer isn't an option. You might know about like gay and straight, right?
Yes.
Or you might know about like lesbians and gay men, but just like you're not taught anything about LGBTQ existence. And so then you can't identify yourself, right?
Yeah.
You don't have a good identity of yourself because you're not given language and education to help figure that out. Same thing with non-monogamy, right? Like you're not given knowledge, education, information to help you figure that stuff out. So the idea of non-monogamy just it literally does not even exist. If it does exist, it exists in kind of the sort of fundamentalist Mormon culture where it's like, a husband marries multiple wives to fulfill his promise to God.
You're right. Yeah. Actually, I never really thought about it, but I didn't even know what swinging was until I think we were already married by that point. Yeah. And I had no idea I had no idea about bisexuality or anything like that either. It was like gay or lesbian or straight. And obviously straight is the only acceptable God honoring thing. And if you feel like you're one way, or if you feel like you're a different way, then, well, we better get you into therapy and we'll teach you what's right.
I remember hearing a kid one time ask their parent in church or on the pew, looking up and say, "What's gay?" Because they said gay, quoted out the Bible, and the parent with that message be looked at it. They're the ones going to hell.
Oh no!
Yeah, I know. We laugh about it, but it's like, these are the things, like you're saying, like these are the things that are being taught to the children. That's like, that child hears that, and it's there now.
So this conversation leads me to question, how real is my sexual orientation, and how real is like my, what I'm into? Because like Char, for example, for this, a long time, she thought she was straight because she wasn't put in a situation where she could even make a choice. And if we would be in a open society where sexuality would be freely explored, do you think it would be easier for us to pick being bisexual at an earlier age? Would it be easier for us to figure out what we're into? Is it what I'm into, what I'm really into, or is it what society wants me to be into?
I definitely think if we had, so I will caveat this to say, obviously age appropriate sex ed, right? Anytime we talk about sex ed, people are like, oh, you're going to teach 5-year-olds about bisexuality and non-monogamy. Calm down. Mm-hmm. We're teaching 5-year-olds about healthy boundaries and consent, people. Okay.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about people getting older, right, there's no reason that we can't give people the language to help them start discerning that, teach them about the people that exist in the world. And sexuality is so colorful. It's a palette. It's like a stained glass window, right? But when you're handed purity culture, it's very much this black and white, prescriptive image, right? And I talk a lot about, like you had mentioned, sexual orientation. And when people come to see me from purity culture, that's kind of the language that they sort of have, right? And there's a lot of different things that go along with sexual orientation. There's relationship orientation. There's your erotic orientation. Your erotic orientation is stuff that you find sexy. It turns you on. It draws you to it. What do you watch in porn? But what you watch in porn isn't necessarily what you might want to do in real life. Lots of people watch images and videos and stuff that turn them on, that move them to an erotic space, but they don't have any interest in doing that in real life. Mm. So then imagine that I have a man coming to me and he's like, I really like watching these videos, right? They turn me on, they turn my partner on, we like it. And they're male, female, threesome videos. Am I gay? Am I gay because I like to watch this stuff? Am I gay? Like, but that's your only kind of framework for that kind of experience, for being turned on by that kind of media, right? So notice how purity culture is so black and white, but sexuality is not, right? It's shades of gray and it's colorful. And so if we teach people that, then yeah, they have a lot more access to self-identifying, a lot more access to exploring what's on their sexual palette.
How do you see purity culture affecting men most significantly?
Ooh, that's a great question because we often forget about that, I think.
Yes.
So I have a really good example of that. And this is a client that I have seen more than one time, right? So this isn't one person. I've seen this issue kind of repeat over and over. We often see men that will have erectile dysfunction issues once they get married. That's one avenue that this can take, right? So when you teach men their entire lives that women don't want to have sex, women perform sex for you, but sex is something that women give to men and men take from women. They're doing it for you, but your wife owes it to you. She's probably not going to like it. Like she might, it's fulfilling her God ordained duty, right? But mostly sex is for men. Then we'll have men get married and they love their partner. They want to have good, pleasurable sex with their partner. Then they go to have sex with their partner and they can't get an erection. And then when they come to the therapy room, you have a discussion about it. And essentially what it comes down to is, I feel like I'm assaulting my partner. She says she wants to have sex, but I was taught my whole life, women don't want to have sex. Good girls don't want to have sex, at least, right? And I married a good girl. And now she wants to have sex with me. And I'm like, I don't know what to do with this, right? And every time I go to try to have sex with her, I feel like I'm assaulting her because I was taught she doesn't actually want this. So that can show up, I guess, in erectile dysfunction issues in men. Another issue that I often see is because in purity culture, women aren't taught to initiate sex, right? We're taught that we're supposed to be passive.
Yeah.
Again, men do sex to us. So we should be sitting back and waiting for the man to initiate sex. So then if their female partner initiates sex, they'll have erectile dysfunction issues. And they'll be like, I don't know what to do with this. Oh my gosh, what do I do with this? This woman's initiating sex. And so then they'll have an issue because they're not the ones in the domination or the control piece of it. And again, that gives us a very narrow area to explore your sexuality. If the only way you can explore sex with your partner is by you being in a dominating position over her and you initiating it, number one, you're not leaving room for her sexual autonomy and her sexual desires, right? But again, that also pigeonholes us into a really narrow way to experience sex and sexuality.
Wow. That's, thank you for sharing that. That's an avenue I'd never really even thought about. And then if you pair that with a wife who has vaginismus or something else, like even if she was wanting to have sex, if there's something else physically where she doesn't, she has some kind of pain or something, then that just compiles like,
yeah, this reminds me, I told you about it, Josh, a few times, and I think we saw it on The Sopranos too, that she kisses my kids with that mouth.
Oh, I don't think The Sopranos was like
what
Casino,
was it?
or it's one of those monster movies.
And I was raised in the exact same way, where men they want to have sex, but they don't want to have sex with their wives. They don't want to have pleasurable sex with their wives because I think they were talking about oral sex. She kisses my kids with that mouth.
Well, yeah. Well, for context, yeah. They asked, why you have a beautiful wife at home? Why are you messing around over here with this, prostitute lady or whatever? She's like, my wife kisses my kids with that mouth.
I was raised in that same belief, which is so double standard. Like some women they're okay to have sex with and others not. And it's so weird. I could never understand. It was such a confusing moment for me in my life when I was a teenager, hearing these kind of conversations.
So it's supposed to be confusing. And that's something that I often point out to people is there's this theory called ambivalent sexism theory. And I almost always discuss it with clients and I teach it regularly in classes. But essentially it's kind of like an ambivalent sexism is here in this bubble. And broken off from that is hostile sexism and benevolent sexism. Benevolent sexism is the good girls. Those are the women that are subscribing to patriarchy and they deserve our protection and they deserve us taking care of them, right? They deserve the protect and provide narrative. But over here on hostile sexism, those are the sluts. Those are the bad girls. Those are the, what were you wearing? How could you do that? Now, on the benevolent sexism side, those good girls don't want to have sex, right? They're supposed to be virginal, pure. We put them up on this pedestal, right? You get benefits. Those are the women that get benefits for adhering to patriarchy. But also, we don't want to have sex with those women. That's the Madonna, right? They have our children. We cherish them and put them on a pedestal. We don't want to do these dirty things that we actually want to do to those good Madonnas. We want to do it to the whores. And you can switch back and forth between Madonna and whore because you don't get to make that determination. Men get to make it for you. And they can make it pretty trivially, right? Like depending on if you wore a skirt today or not. But it's supposed to be confusing. It's supposed to put women in this space where you're just like, I can't win. I can't win.
Right.
And you're constantly hustling for your worth.
Very interesting.
That actually brings up something I was wanting to talk about was just the cultural shame. So like, even if I don't personally feel ashamed of my relationship dynamics and my sexual relationships, I know that much of the culture around me does see it as something shameful. So I guess, how would you advise people to handle that, respond to that?
So I definitely go towards a place with a lot of my clients where there's a difference between secrets and privacy, right? Nobody is entitled to information about you and your relationships unless they're the people that you're in relationship with, right? That's one thing. But often in purity culture, we're also taught this idea that like we're lying, we're withholding, we're scheming, right? But privacy is a thing. And often our sexual privacy was violated in purity culture, right? Like people talk to us a lot about like masturbation and how dare you masturbate? You shouldn't be. So even our private time or our private thoughts, what thoughts you have, like can be a sin in purity culture. So it's so high control over there that we can often forget that we're entitled to privacy, right? You don't have to give people this information. So secrets are something that's going to be damaging, right? Seriously damaging to something. So like I'm cheating on my partner. That's a secret, right? But if you're not telling your parents that you're non-monogamous because you don't want to, that's privacy. You don't have to tell anybody that. If you don't want to tell the people that you work with, that's privacy, right? People aren't entitled to this information. That being said, some people are also like, I don't want to hide this part of my life. I don't want to feel like I have to, right? It's not necessarily a privacy issue. It's part of my living my authentic life is being open and honest about this. Shame is something that other people try to hand to you. Hand it back. Because my mother knows that I'm non-monogamous, right? And she had some ideas about that. And she made her thoughts known at one point. And she was like, well, I just don't want the rest of the family to know, right? Like, I don't care, but like if the rest of the family knew, and it's because if the rest of the family knew, my mom would be so embarrassed. She would be so ashamed.
Yeah.
And again, like I'm a therapist, right? I'm also a well-therapized human being. So it took me, like half a day. And then I called my mom back and I'm like, hey, I thought about what you said and I'm not going to own that shame for you. You tried to hand it to me, but like, that's really your shame. So we don't judge people in an area unless we feel shame about it ourselves. I don't judge people for what they like or what they're into sexually as long as nobody's getting hurt, right? I'm not going to yuck your yum. And that's because I don't have sexual shame myself. I fully believe in sexual liberation. But if somebody doesn't and they carry sexual shame themselves and they hear something from you that triggers their own sexual shame, they're going to try to hand that shame to you because they don't want to deal with the discomfort. People can't make you feel ashamed about something unless you feel ashamed about it. So like hand that right back to them and be like, no, I'm not wearing that for you. This is for you.
Thank you. I like that.
That's deep. I like it.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's amazing.
I feel like I go through that all the time, just being in a throuple. It's not even the sexuality of it, of having sex with two people instead of just one, just being together. Like, I feel like sometimes I have to hide because I don't know how people are going to react. And I don't want to go through that conversation with them. So I don't know if it's my shame as much as I just don't want to explain myself to people. But yeah.
And that's the boundary you get to make in that moment, right? Like we make these little adjustments depending on who we're interacting with as well. So like if I'm interacting with this person and in this moment, I'm like, that's a lot of mental and emotional labor out of me because I know you're going to ask me a lot of questions and I know I'm not really wanting to put forth that labor for you right now. Then at that point, you're preserving yourself, right? You're preserving your own energy. And that's a boundary that you get to keep.
In regards to handling family, because in our throuple and in this podcast, one of our missions is to kind of normalize alternative family structures and let people see, kind of showcase that families, loving, healthy homes come in all kinds of different dynamics. So we don't want to just be hiding in the shadows. So I guess, how do you respond to that family that is ashamed? I guess maybe like mental things that you can do, because even if I'm not feeling ashamed,
they are.
I feel
it. And you feel bad
makes me feel awful that they're so ashamed or embarrassed of my family.
So it's definitely never our job to like take care of other people's emotions for them, right?
Yeah.
But we can sit with them, if depending on who it is, right? If it's family, again, you get to determine those boundaries for yourself. But if it's family, you can sit in that with them and ask them those questions, like, what's coming up for you in this? Where's this coming from? Like, I'm feeling some judgment coming from you. Where's this coming from? And asking lots of questions, right? Because what we're not trying to do is put them on necessarily on the defensive.
Mm-hmm.
So I try not to say things like, why are you feeling that way? Because why questions often make people feel defensive. But what's coming up for you? Where is this coming from? What part of what I told you brings you discomfort? Are you concerned for me? Well, let's talk about that. Are you concerned for yourself? Let's talk about that, right? And then with ourselves, we can ask ourselves those same gentle questions. Like if, say, my mom, right, tries to place that shame on me, and sometimes that works. Like sometimes it really scratches at a wound that's in there that had a scab on it. And then you're like, ooh, that scab just got picked off and this doesn't feel good, right? This feels icky. So then we can sit with ourselves and ask ourselves the same types of questions. What, how, when have I felt something similar like this? What might be coming forward for me? Has anyone else said something like this that made me feel this way, right? And we can kind of sit down and introspect. And that's the great thing about being non-monogamous is we can bounce these off of our partners as well. Have you ever felt that way? When did you feel that way? I wonder if that's the same stuff coming up for me.
Do you have any advice specifically for the partners of anybody that's struggling with religious trauma and just some of these, I guess, mental blocks?
I would definitely learn more about religious trauma, learn more about the various symptoms that can come forward, right? Religious trauma we call it religious trauma syndrome, right? It's not in the DSM. Syndrome is a collection of symptoms. That's what syndrome is. We're describing a collection of symptoms. So find out what that collection of symptoms is. And especially if you weren't raised in purity culture, go out and pick up a book or like quick Google search online if you don't want to pick up a book, right? Purity culture recovery, Church 2 movement. Because often when people are not raised in purity culture, when they don't have that like heavy authoritarian messaging, it can be really hard to understand just how deep and how ingrained that is. And one of my partners was not raised in purity culture at all. So as I was coming out of my own recovery, just telling them some of the stuff that you learned, like, tell me y'all have told people some of the stuff that you were taught in purity culture. And they're like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Like, who would tell a child that?
Yeah. And
Why
stuff
would
that seemed
anybody
totally
do that?
normal to hear. Like you're so young, you don't question it at all. Like the chewed up gum or the sucked on Tic Tac or the tape that's been stuck to so much stuff that it can't stick to anything anymore.
Yep. And they're just like, what? I would never tell a child that. And you're like, yeah, I know. But also, so if you weren't raised in it, it's really difficult to understand, like, yes, people will tell children that. Another one that I hear often, and this was very common among my upbringing as well. So like no shade, the amount of people that were assigned female at birth who took pregnancy tests before they even had sexual intercourse.
Yeah.
Because we were taught so much that like, if you even sat on a man's lap, you could be pregnant now.
Yeah.
So that's insane to people. People are like, who's dumb enough to take a pregnancy test when you haven't even had sex yet? People raised in purity culture who got taught we could like look at a boy down the hall and get pregnant. Those people.
Yep.
So just really absorbing that information, right? Listen to podcasts like this. Listen to other people discuss their experiences because storytelling is really important as well, right? And hearing other people's stories can help us identify things in ourselves, can help us introspect and understand like, oh, that's a leftover from purity culture, and I didn't realize that. Or maybe your partner has trouble initiating sex, right? And you're like, but why? Just initiate. It's not hard. Just do it. Just do it. It's so easy to say, just do it. But when you were raised in purity culture, you just can't. It's so hard to get past it. So listening to other people's experiences, talking about that can really normalize it, help people be more gentle and understanding with their partner. And rather than saying like, oh, just get over it, let's work on this together to figure out how we can problem solve and manage this.
Yes. Right. I loved that book, Pure by Linda K. Klein. She's actually coming on the podcast in a couple of weeks, and I'm so excited to talk to her. And that was just so helpful, hearing all the stories, and so many of them had so many parallels to my own upbringing. It's like, it was really reaffirming. Like, wow, okay, like I am not alone here.
Yeah. So,
and I think we also forget that like Linda K. Klein's a really good example because she wrote that book. She grew up sort of in like the late 90s, early 2000s. And remember, y'all, purity was a whole movement. Like this was a non-secular movement. Like the Jonas Brothers, Demi Lovato, they were all sporting these purity rings. There was like this purity movement that moved through our public school system. And even in our public school system today, sex ed is so abysmal. They teach purity culture ethic in public school sex ed. So even if you have a partner or you yourself you're like, well, I wasn't raised, heavily in religion. We still heavily taught purity culture in public schools through the 90s and early 2000s. It's getting a little bit better now, but not much. People are getting less sex ed today than they did in the 80s. And it's because of this purity culture takeover.
Wow.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Josh and I were both homeschooled through much of I was homeschooled the whole time. I didn't know that was so infiltrated in public school as well. That's very interesting.
Is there
only 18 states require sex ed to be medically accurate?
Wow.
That's a problem. Interesting.
That's good to know as parents. That's really good to know.
Right.
Absolutely. And you just brought up like as parents. So something that I do, speaking back to people that, like to shame throuples and stuff. Y'all, what do you think divorced couples are? If you have a divorced person that's remarried, right? So say I have a woman that's divorced, she's remarried to a man, and she has her ex-husband, and they're co-parenting together. They're working together. They text each other, you're picking up the kid at this time, you're okay, great. I'm going to pay for his camp this summer, but can you pay for this, blah, blah, blah. You're not having sex as a throuple, but that's the only thing that's removed from that. Right. You're still communicating, you're still raising kids together, right? So we are aware of families that have other dynamics that exist as throuples. It's just that when you put stuff in a non-monogamy context, now people want to make it all about sex.
Yeah.
Now people are like, oh, you're having sex. Oh, you're these sexual deviants.
Yes. Right. That's
you exist the exact same way, right? As a couple.
Right.
You're just also having sex.
Right. Yeah. We're definitely trying to like remove all the sexualizing of the throupling and just showcase that we are a family first.
Yeah.
Right. And honestly, in non-monogamy, like, yes, of course, like sex happens, right? But that's the least interesting part. And that's the least time consuming part. Like you guys, the communication's the most time consuming part.
Very true.
That's right. It's more
like
talking.
Yeah.
This was a great talk. Thank you so much.
Yes.
I learned a lot, and it definitely clarified some of the things that I was going through as a child growing up.
Yeah. Do you have any closing thoughts or anything you want to share with our listeners?
There are tons of resources out there. Like you'd mentioned the book Pure. That's absolutely great. Another really good one that I like for people that are still, because often when you leave purity culture, you're kind of on the fence. Like you might have one foot still in the religion, one out, and you're trying to figure out, where do I land in this? There's a book called The Great Sex Rescue, which is absolutely fabulous. It still is very religious based, right? So if you're still a Christian and you're like, I still adhere to like a Christian ethic, that's a great one. It unpacks a lot of the harmful messages, especially given to AFAB people and women that are grown up in purity culture. Church 2 is another really great book by Emily Jo Allison. She's a queer woman that wrote about church sexual assault, right? So if you grew up in a church and you experienced some kind of sexual assault or sexual violence, that's another really great one. And there's resources like this out here, like storytelling again. And that's what Pure is, right? Pure is storytelling. So is Church too. That's a book about telling our stories. We know that storytelling brings people together and it really, really helps healing. So keep searching out resources. There's definitely sex therapists out there that can help you through that process as well. But there are many people now telling their stories about coming out of purity culture. So really seek those people out and listen to that storytelling and then sit back and kind of introspect. Like, how does this sit with me? How does this show up in my life?
And we're going to include all your information in the show notes if anybody wants to get in touch with you.
I'm taking new patients right now in Florida and Nebraska.
Awesome.
So if you're in either one of those locations, by all means, hit me up.
If you like our podcast, don't forget to subscribe and share our episodes with people just like yourself.
If you are in a throuple, please head over to Facebook and join Throuple Talks Connection Hub.
And we'll see you next time.